Namaste, everyone. I'm going to give you a relaxing Kundalini yoga that will balance out the subtle body, balance out the physical body, the emotional body, as well as balance the physiological connection that you have so that you can become more sensitive, therefore more intuitive, therefore more poetic, more soulful, and overall more creative in a very simple, subtle, and yet quite extraordinary way. Okay, so we're going to really simplify ourselves, right? The child's mind, the learner's mind, is a very simple mind, right? And the simplicity is the sort of birthing ground for poetry, innovation, music, right? Because in the sort of subtlety, we're able to tap into higher frequencies, higher vibrations, right? So it's a universal practice of being in nature, being in the quiet, silent meditation. And that kind of being the sort of revelation that leads into novels or leads into inventions or leads into albums, right? There's always this great revelation, right, that happens within the quiet, within the silence of your being, right? So in our world, right, where we're on Instagram time, we're just all seeming scrambled in other people's business, right? And this sort of competing, comparing, contrasting, complaining, right? In this, that creates this conflict within ourselves, right? So the quiet, the silence, there's a sort of physiological adjustment that happens that leads into these grand ideas, right? Connecting with a tree. There's so many stories across this planet of people that just spent like 30 days in silent meditation, or 30 days doing yoga, 30 days sort of forest bathing, or taking a morning walk, or doing the morning sadhana, or bowing japji, or the morning, long cars. There's this type of theme that goes on when it comes to the creative spark, inspiration. The real inspiration that has the sort of grit and has the impact and has that sort of continuity, or that sort of continuation, that it really is an extension, a very profound extension of our energy, is the deeper it comes from within, the more extended, expansive it can be without. So a lot of times we're scrambled with other people's businesses, and we're all trying to comparing our sort of projection to their projection, and so on and so forth, that we can lose that sort of inner grit we have when we're in that simple sort of childlike mind, right? And then you get interlocked with all other people's projections, and you lose that grit, right? And I like to say, you really want to be a futurist, creatively, inventively. I mean, when we look at the people that had the sort of expansive, creative projection, they were all futurists, right? They were all the ones that still have this momentum of creative edge or creative niche, right? We think of like Einstein. We can think of it in a scientific perspective, an artistic perspective, a musical perspective. There's a sense of the deeper they went within, the more edgy they became, more, you could say, quirky or sort of funky or different or indifferent to the vast majority, right? Like when we think of like Einstein, right, as an example, right, he seemed kind of like a little bit indifferent in many ways. And that's just, there's so many individuals that really represent the Renaissance consciousness. They're just in different sort of time zones of that, right? And the reason they have such an expansive projection, that have this continuity, that again, Einstein definitely generations of continuity, its continuation, is because they went deep within themselves. The deeper we are within ourselves, the greater the projection we have, the grit we have, right? We become a futurist. Your outside sort of field that we call the worldly matters, the deeper you go within, you're able to tap into a futurist edge, right? And that futurist edge is basically you are tapping into the sort of future version of yourself and bringing it into the present. And that future version of yourself is called the elder. All of us have an elder self, right? Even when I meditate, I'm like, sometimes I see this woman and I'm like, who is this woman? And it's like my 6-year-old self, right? And the sort of grit that has been established through 60 years of being on this planet and have gathered so many seasons of energy and the sort of transformation of that. The more transformation you have, the more knowledge you have. So a lot of, in this world, we have this sort of like, people are like psychologically dead, right? Because they're not transforming. They're not transforming. We become psychologically dead when we don't transform, right? So the more transformation you have, the more experience you have. And experience, it's going to give you polarity. It's going to give you challenge. It's going to give you blessing. That's just how it is. But it's also going to give you grit. And I said, the deeper the grit, the more impact the chakra system has with life. You have a stronger life force. And therefore, your creative edge, your creative niche has more of a sort of grit, a sort of edge, a sort of stronger projection, right? Because it's coming from within you, right? And you don't necessarily need to have these sort of projection interlocks to actually have your projection, to actually, kind of build it up. A lot of times we do that because our projection actually isn't strong enough. It doesn't have enough penetrative force. So we have to interlock our projection with other people's, right? And they're sort of, you could call it branding, or their sort of style, or their sort of whatever they're doing, whatever they're kind of organizing themselves, we try to mimic it, right? But naturally, we are always going to be influenced, right? Influence, inspiration is an exploration. It is a sort of appreciation, right? Appreciation for fine art, or appreciation for music, or appreciation for other people's works of art, or innovations. It's to trigger the possibility within us, right? For us to connect with our own projection, our own sort of simple mind, learner's mind, sort of inner child self, our creative edge, a creative niche, right? And the more sort of indifferent defined your creative edge, creative niche is, the more expansive your sort of projection, when the sort of continuity and the sort of continuation of it will be, right? So we're going to work on the sort of physiological connection and the sort of balance of that. And also, again, becoming more sensitive, more subtle, and even more emotional, in a way that we think of becoming emotional as like chaos and total mayhem and just messy, and it's just all over the place. And just, we think of that as being emotional. More emotional. Actually, there's a lot of radiance to that. There's a lot to be able to express yourself, to be able to de-thaw yourself, to be transformative. That's what your emotional body is. It's transformative, right? So when we numb out, we, become emotionally like empty, all these type of things, we lose that transformative sort of like to say floodgate, right? That transformative floodgate that literally just moves us where we need to go, right? It moves us where we need to go. So the more that we kind of undergo the sort of shedding of emotions, the crying, the anger, whatever it is, it's actually going to help us to flush out these sort of, you could say, what is haggard in us, or what is out of date, or what is a memory. We're too caught in the past, nostalgia, right? Being too sentimental, right? Being in this sort of sympathy, being in the moodiness, right? Right? It helps to really flush that out of us, right? So that waters, right? That sort of flushing, it really cleans it out, cleans out the riverbank, right? So, but the transformation we have, it really does drop into the subtlety, the simplicity of your imagination and your sensitivity, and that kind of being the sign, the synchronicity that makes you a futurist in many ways, in the way that you can really connect to different time periods, you can connect to different generations, and that's what a futurist is. Not only does your transmission, your heart transmission, connect to people of this current time, this generation, but it can cross through generations, right? The heart transmission is such a futurist, where it can connect to people like born in the 40s, right? People who are going to be born in like 2050 or 2080, right? The sort of past and the future, because that heart frequency has this sort of deep cultivation within yourself, and the sort of simplicity and the subtlety of yourself, right? And that, even in many ways, that sort of craftsmanship, or that sort of creative edge or creative niche, it actually creates its own sort of realm in which people can kind of jump into and kind of learn something about that, right? So whatever it is, it's like we're creating a reality that gives knowledge, right? That's a realm. A realm is basically defined as a space of knowledge, right? And realm is a space you call elemental realm, angelic realm, the stone realm, forest, you call the celestial realm, the etheric realm, all these type of realms. What is it? Is holding a particular knowledge that people can access. When you go to the elemental realm, usually you're getting knowledge of like medicine, like plant medicine, right? Or sort of shamanistic view, right? Or sort of traditions about, ceremonious ritualist traditions when it comes to the moon, and even you'll connect with cosmology, right? The celestial realms, there's a great knowledge on intergalactic beings, interdimensional travel, like stargates, sort of incarnations, reincarnation, like avatar type of stuff, right? And then connecting to like a realm, a human realm, right? You're working with the emotional body and the knowledge of what it means to have emotional maturity, right? That's what the human realm is about, emotional maturity, right? And that's why we're different from like these little gray aliens, or these little tall, other aliens that all look the same. They're not working on the sort of emotional body, right? A lot of them are working, they're really in the intellectual body. And some of these aliens, gray aliens, and those sort of variations, they're actually, they admire the human experience, because we actually have this emotional, we're very tribal, right? We're not so intellectualized to the point where we're just traveling through space and we lose contact with our earth, with our original tribe. Some of these gray aliens, they don't really have that sense of ancestors, right? They're all just sort of genetically made in some water sack or something like that, within a lab or something. Very, very mechanical. Some of these mechanical, robotic, artificial, right? You lose your arm, you just grow it back through some sort of mutation, right? This type of stuff. But we as human beings, we're not there yet. We're taking a path of like more Pleiadian path. And the Pleiadian path is, Pleiadians, they have diversity. They don't look all the same. They're not hairless. They're not boobless. They're not penisless. Like you see some of these aliens, the sort of gray alien types. You can see that kind of, they all look the same, but there's a sense of an absent sort of heart frequency in many ways. There's a huge sort of intellectualization, a huge sort of power of sort of materialization of your mind and that kind of technology, but the heart frequency, right? The heart frequency has to do with your ancestors, has to do with your tribe, your connection to your planet, the connection to the plants, the animals, right? So the more space travelers we become, the more we can sort of uproot ourselves in over many generations, thousands of years. We can lose that kind of earth heart frequency, right? Or planet frequency, because the planet is a heartbeat. And when you're traveling through space, through whatever, in your spaceship, you lose the heartbeat, right? You lose that heart. The planet is a heartbeat, right? And Earth has a very profound heartbeat, right? It's called the rotation. It's a heartbeat, right? So that's the celestial communication, is the heartbeat. The heartbeat. Containing within the single heartbeat is this whole thread of light language, right? Of music, art, science, feelings, stories, narratives, choices of every human being that's ever existed. And all comes in this great big sort of gonging broadcast through the heartbeat, right? Like a big bang. It's like everything comes in, right? And moves, and creation of all the various forms of that. Quite extraordinary, right? So we're going to kind of return back to the subtlety, the simplicity of our creative edge or creative niche that we all have as a child, but we get very, very insecure about that, right? We question and we doubt our ability to actually connect with a higher experience on this planet. We question that. We even deny it, or we have so much doubt around it, right? We're challenged deeply by it, right? But the ones that actually are able to create the breakthrough, they enjoy the challenge of it, like solving a mathematical problem that you've been looking at for a decade, right? That's the type of breakthrough that the human experience is about, right? It's about that kind of facing the challenge. Think about if you're some sort of mathematician, you have this great mathematical sort of equation that is just about some sort of space-time continuum, whatever that is, right? And you got to solve it, but it's so complex. It took you almost 10 years to get where you're at. The reason you're where you're at, right, with the sort of grandness of it, is because of your ability to face the challenge of it, right? To face the challenge of it. And the way we face the challenge of it is through gratitude. That's a very simple, subtle survival instinct, but also a sort of present moment that gives us relaxation, that helps us to heal, and creates this sort of, I like to say, this sort of state of mind that is most therapeutic. Because whatever challenge it is, some areas it's a lot more intensified because there's a lot more transformation that has to happen, right? And the intense transformation, it moves from one geographic to the other, right? All geographic regions are going to have major intense transformation, right, to the sort of collective consciousness as a state of revamping, reinventing, right, providing knowledge of sort of emotional maturity or a major life lesson or major breakthrough or karmic debt being paid, right? Removing the stubbornness, the sort of past sort of stuck energy, right, that's creating this human flatline, right? People are psychologically dead, this human flatline. There's always something that revamp, right? The heartbeat of the earth will not let human beings remain in a state or a phase where there isn't much growth, right? It's just not how the earth will be. So the child's mind is so unique, and you look at the sort of everywhere, these sort of simple subtle energies, learner's mind in different areas, from like more privileged type of backgrounds to very seeming unfortunate or very unfortunate backgrounds, and what they have to face every day, right? Where the thing is right at their door, right? Every day there's some sort of danger, but you can see the child, there's a sense of being present with it. There's a sense of understanding that the challenge, like a great mathematician, will not necessarily be solved in a day, but that's okay, right? Because there's a willingness to connect to a state of gratitude, to be present, to breathe, to open up your creativity. And that is how we as human beings, in many ways, are not only able to survive, but also invent our way into a new reality, creating a new realm, right, within ourselves, our family, and just within the generations of us. So we're going to work on just the dropping in, that sort of state. We want to create that sort of the sort of learner's mind, that sort of child's mind state, where we're very receptive to the challenge, like a great mathematician or a great yoga person who wants to do a yoga pose, and it took them 10 years to do it, or dance class and learn to dance, right? Tap dance took them 10 years. Everything about this earth and the human emotion is from a state of you facing the challenge and being grateful for your breakthrough, even for the opportunity to go have 10, 20 years or 5 years or 2 years of actually being able to develop your willingness to learn. That's the psychologically dead for a lot of people. It's just the the emotional, the energy is just not moving. The transformation is just not happening, right? Emotionally, right? And it all of that is an indication of the revamping, the reinventing, and also the sort of following on this sort of simple, subtle guidance system, right? These little, just simple, subtle adjustments can create such a profound sort of projection of our radiant body onto this earth, creating a very potentiated opportunity for us to continue to move forward. Okay.